everyone. Dr. Francis wishing you happy holidays. When you're looking for that perfect present to gift to those you love, look no further than Walmart. This year, joyfully and giftfully with the diversity of products created by Black entrepreneurs. This message is sponsored by Walmart.
Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast. Inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Francis Richards.
What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience, episode number 278. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black Entrepreneur Experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Francis Richards, an activist, sociologist, and criminologist, educator, researcher, and founder of 365 Diversity. Welcome, Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Dennis, I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with us what you'd like us to know about you and 365 Diversity?
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis. I'm an activist, sociologist, criminologist, educator, and researcher and founder of 365 Diversity. So I'm born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. Then I lived in North Carolina for 17 years. And for 9 of those years, I was full-time faculty at a college and part-time staff at a university. And I did a lot of community work, activism, out of my own pocket, community presentations, having vendor tables at Black community events. Usually these are Black health tables. So I was on mental health board of directors, suicide prevention board of directors. I often did not get paid as a consultant. So that's an example of Black women. We do a whole lot of free labor because we really think like we're fighting for a larger cause. And eventually I had to be honest that a whole lot of this work was being done. I was exhausting myself doing 12-hour days between 2 jobs, doing this community work. I spent more time doing community work than I spent at work on purpose. And I just had to be honest with myself. I'm exhausting myself. And then I found out there's people who are getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to not even have half of the knowledge that I have, half of the expertise that I have, and not even investing half as much as time as I was investing in this community work. So that's when I decided to transition to a consultant. And eventually I started my own business and left academia in terms of full-time faculty. When I was full-time faculty, I created an academic program. And so that was a crime program. So I also specialize in creating education programs. I specialize in doing curriculum developments, program assessments. So I have a whole lot of specializations that I noticed a lot of people started doing equity trainings. It became very trendy over the past 10 years. And there's those of us who are trained in centuries of Black activism scholarship before these acronyms like DEI existed. I want our voices to be louder because we have a whole lot of Black writings, a whole lot of Black work that are being thrown under the table. And so that's part of what I do. I not only do inclusion and equity work, but I do it based on not treating adults like kindergartners. You know, we can explain definitions all day, every day, but my work is results-based. So we talk about changing policies, talk about changing practices, talk about doing annual assessments and evaluations. So beyond smiles and hugging each other, what are some real changes that are going on? So that's what I specialize in.
Talk about your ideal client.
Thank you for asking that. So my ideal client is a school business organization that is willing to admit who really controls the decision making. And this is important for equity work because that's one of the first things I ask people when they contact me for training. Because I also do get work done workshops, which those are the people who claim they want to change their policies and procedures. And I say, well, let's do it. And then do assessments. So when people contact me, I also ask them who are the decision makers, because nearly every school, business, and organization will say they want inclusion, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, health disparities. But then when you find out who are the ultimate people who make the decision, you realize that most of these places might do one training, but the decision makers will complain even in that one training if it challenges them too much. And decision makers are not always the managers and the CEOs and the employers themselves. Decision makers include the employees, the students who are within the power majority. So power majority means white people as it pertains to race, men as it pertains to gender, cisgender people as it pertains to gender, heterosexuals, people of able health as it pertains to health conditions, wealthy people, religious majority, the list goes on. So what I expect from clients is to be able to start off first with that honest conversation. Here's what you all want. Do you all really want that in terms of results? Or is this kind of like your official anti-racism statement, but you're not changing anything? And that honest discussion is something that's important, not only for changes, but also so that they know that I'm going to come into this expecting you all to be serious. But if everything ends the moment that white people, for example, get uncomfortable, then the question goes back to you all. What did you really want to happen?
And how is that work going for you?
So it really depends. So again, my work is based on centuries of this work that existed before these acronyms and catchphrases like anti-racism existed. And so it goes well, like when we talk about after George Floyd was murdered, when the Black Lives Matter protests were more popular in terms of mainstream, and there were a lot of white people at the protests. Beginning of COVID, that's when a lot of people really claimed to be interested, right? But that's the same thing over and over again. When things are trending in terms of popularity on social media and in the news, schools, businesses, and organizations, they release an official statement. They have a book club where they read a New York Times bestseller anti-racism book. And then they say, let's contact Dr. Dennis. We're so excited. And then things calm down because white people, as it pertains to race, realize that racial equity is not about hugging white people. It really is about challenging white people in schools, businesses, and organizations, politicians, and so forth. Then they think that COVID might be over soon, right? So they're like, life back to normal. So, for example, United States of America, back to normal for a lot of people means inequities and injustices keep going. We don't have to talk about it anymore. So I do this work. I keep doing this work. I keep doing community work. We change it to virtual, but I tell people that this is just normal with the kind of work that we're doing, including when I do work for medical and health professionals. It's going to fluctuate based on what people have the time to do, what people are interested in doing. And honestly, a lot of places would rather pay a whole lot of money to a consultant who's not going to make changes than hire a consultant who's actually going to change some stuff. Because a lot of places do not want to be held accountable and they want to just be content with the injustices happening there.
Talk about COVID-19, the pandemic, pivot, and profits.
Yes. So with COVID-19, it's interesting how that happened. So when I transitioned out of academia into doing my business, I had spent a whole lot of money purchasing items for the business, a whole lot of money. And then COVID hit. So everything that I was supposed to travel for, presentations, trainings, I had bought a new tent with 365. I was just going all out. And then things became canceled or became virtual. So that hit a lot, of course, financially for the business. And then, of course, the virtual work. Me personally, I do virtual presentations and virtual meetings, but I'm really not a virtual person in the sense of I actually like to talk to people face to face if possible. So that's what I prefer. And so with equity work, equity trainings, it's actually more beneficial when you're face to face. Because what happens with virtual equity and justice discussions and trainings is that it's an extreme version of what most people do anyway. Like most of the time when we're in face-to-face trainings to talk about inequities in policing, medical health providers, and employers, you can notice people's facial expressions and people's seating style when you're in front of them, right? And that's one thing I always tell people when I do this work. I'm like, even if you're not saying anything, I can tell by your eye roll, your facial expression, how you change your posture in your seat, how you're feeling, right? So when it's virtually, it's a little bit more difficult for that to happen. There have been some times during COVID that I've actually done presentations that include COVID-19 because people want to discuss racism during COVID. And in that, I explain, yes, COVID has highlighted medical racism, scientific racism. It's highlighted academic racism, K through 12 racism in terms of these virtual courses, and highlighted how most students and most families in America, the virtual classroom is not as easy as it's assumed. So I've done presentations about that. But then I've also had to highlight, this is not a groundbreaking thing though, right? Like COVID is the new tragedy to highlight the injustices that we've literally talked about for centuries. So during COVID, a lot of people say they opened their eyes to inequities. Like there are literally people who say that, and particularly white people, but non-Black people also, but particularly white people will say during COVID has made me think critically about the schools and about health providers and so forth. And they want that to be celebrated. So even when I discuss COVID-19 in my trainings, I explain that it's really scary that with 5 centuries of white supremacy and how this land was stolen on the Western Hemisphere and what's going on all around the world, 5 centuries, that people want COVID-19 to be the eye opener. Just like George Floyd being murdered was the eye opener, right? So when I explain that in trainings, there's some people who are offended because they say, well, you should be happy when recognizing this. And I say, well, Black people have been told for 4 centuries that we should be happy that something's being recognized, right? Instead of Black people being told constantly that we should be happy something's being recognized, now we're asking you all, okay, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, you're recognizing it now. What's going to happen now? What's going to change? And when you ask these people what's going to change, that's when they go back to saying, well, we'll see after COVID-19. So in other words, COVID-19 is the initiator of the conversation. But then when you ask, okay, how are we going to change these inequities in schools and so forth, they end with COVID-19. We'll talk about it after COVID-19. So that's the complexity whenever there's a tragedy, because some people use the tragedy as a distraction from being held accountable to make some changes. Like they're pretending that they don't have time to change policies and practices. They do, because schools have actually literally changed policies and practices to figure out how to make more money to get people back into schools. So if you know how to change policies and practices to make money and get state funding, you know how to change the school curriculum during COVID.
Talk about that story, Dr. Dennis, about transitioning from academia and going into entrepreneurship.
Yes, so that transition was 10 years in the making. So I've always been more of a person who did more community work. And so for my courses, my crime courses and my sociology courses, I required students in certain courses to do off-campus work. So they weren't allowed to just memorize theories, books, journal articles, and repeat it. I would tell them, you're actually going to do an assignment, you're doing off-campus work, you can do a video based on what you're doing, and in exams, you have to explain this using everyday language. I specialize in teaching people how to use everyday language. That includes medical and health students and medical and health professionals. Some students were excited about that, right? Because I'm preparing them for a life where you can't go into environments reciting this theory says, because if you're really talking about doing some change, we don't want to hear about the theory, right? We really want to hear what's the practical application, what's the real life applicability. So I always in my mind, I probably was always making that transition. It just it took me 10 years after I got tenured associate professor. And that's when I said, okay, I got tenured associate professor. Now let me invest more in my consulting work. And that investment also happened because I met with a business advisor when I still lived in North Carolina. And I was critical of these diversity trainings. And I was like, I've been to so many trainings, including faculty trainings, and they are 100% designed to keep white people from crying and to keep men from trying to argue with you and just going on and on and on. And eventually this business advisor, who's a Black man, said, you got so many complaints, Dr. Dennis. Now you got to explain how you're going to contribute to this work. And that's when I stepped back. I was like, I do have a lot of complaints. So this probably happened like 6 years ago. I said, and that's when I furthered my consulting work to actually do presentations and trainings for school decision makers, for medical and health professionals, and for medical and health students. So starting that, I still was a professor. And then eventually I was like, let me close this door, at least in terms of full-time faculty positions, and then transition to this business. And it was a smooth transition for me because I literally was doing this work for 10 years. I think I was afraid to not be a full-time faculty anymore because a lot of times people are afraid to sacrifice that salary and sacrifice that insurance that goes to the school and that retirement. But thankfully, I have wonderful financial advisors as well who helped me transition all that. So they're like, you're not going broke, but you're just transitioning your retirement and everything into your own, and it's no longer under a university. So it was wonderful. And these are all Black people who are consulting me. It's just wonderful having those outlets that help me know that I can stop being scared and stop using excuses to stay into something that I'm really no longer full-time invested in being.
Talk about that fear. Someone's listening to the podcast and they're ready to slice the chains of working for someone. Talk about that fear and transitioning.
Yeah, so I also specialize in mental health, particularly Black mental health. And mental health includes even if you do not have a diagnosable mental health condition. So fear is a normal emotion. Whenever people tell you don't be afraid, it really depends on the topic, but some things it's understandable to be afraid. So instead of people telling you don't be afraid of transitioning to a different career, to being an entrepreneur, whenever people tell you don't be afraid, tell them I'm still afraid. So what you gonna do to help me? Right? Like, do you have some connections, some networks, or are you just gonna lecture me about, pray about it and be quiet? Because a lot of times, unfortunately, within Black cultures, when people say pray about it, there's the hidden shut up about it behind that, right? Because a lot of times people do not want to talk about this because a lot of people come from families where you didn't talk about when you're stressed out. Because talking about being stressed out implies that you lack faith that things can get better and things can be successful. So I want people to know it's understandable to be afraid. It's also understandable to understand that not everyone who starts a business will have a successful business. Most businesses do not last long. Even businesses that last long, in the first 5 to 10 years, you're not really making a profit. You're spending a whole lot of money. You better have a really good tax preparer, and you better have some good chambers of commerce that you're a member of that are really helping you, including the Better Business Bureau. So you want to prepare for all of that, and it takes time. Don't let anyone yell at you about, oh, it's easy to have an LLC. It's easy to do this. It's not easy. The people who say it's easy, you do not want to see their tax returns, their debt ratio, and all of that. So I tell people it's okay to be afraid. Find collaborators. This could be fellow entrepreneurs. Also know that being an entrepreneur, starting a business does not mean that it has to be your only career and your only job. So I also have other employment. And this is also good because it builds up my expertise and my knowledge based on my community work. So you just have to understand that a lot of people start a business and they might change careers, but then they also find a part-time job, something that provides additional resources, something that helps them help the community and other work. So you want to get rid of this falsehood that most people just in their career, they don't have any money in the bank, they don't have any investments, they don't have a side job, and now they just pro-business and they are running these streets, knocking on doors. That's just not reality. Even if people will tell you it is, if you knew what they were doing in part-time, they probably have a side gig, including teaching an online course or something. So you just want to understand that there's not just one way to go about it. You want to do a way that's good for you, including if you might have like a health condition. If you have like a health condition or a disability, you need money because you don't want to not have money in case there's a medical emergency and you have to pay medical bills. And we all need insurance. Okay. So I want people to understand you're not starting from scratch in terms of not saving up money and resources, the importance of networking. And so this is just where I'll also put in Mark Granovetter. When I do trainings and presentations, I use Mark Granovetter's book, Strength of Weak Ties, and that's the importance of networking. And so networking varies by demographics. So for example, Black people, women are oftentimes have a difficulty networking, including business networking. Why? Because we tend to come from cultures where we're told, if you don't know that person, why are you saying hi to them? Right? Or if you don't know that person, why y'all going to lunch? And you actually see it, like when you go to meetings, you'll see the people who are in the corner hanging out with each other or by themselves versus the people who are going to every single random person, hugging them, head nod, shaking the hand, and saying, hi, I'm so-and-so. Let me give you my card. Okay. Same thing with email correspondence. There's a huge demographic difference in terms of people who don't know someone, but they're sending an email to say, I want to introduce myself. So that's one thing I always did with students. And most of my students were Black and non-white Hispanic students. And we would do an exercise, talked about the strength of weak ties. I would say, y'all are in the same classroom all semester and half of y'all ain't even gone across this classroom to say, who's on the other side of this classroom? So I would do sessions. I did this for 9 years where you had to walk around to someone you don't know and actually sit down and introduce yourself, tell them about your expertise. Because a lot of my students were older also, so they had full-time jobs. And guess what? For example, a lot of Black women met each other. I'm like, see, I don't know what y'all talking about, but where I'm from, when I see Black folk, I'm happy. I'm like, hey, sister, hey, brother, we gonna talk. But a lot of these Black students had gotten so comfortable, they weren't meeting each other. And guess what came from that? Some Black students got jobs from that. They realized that the person sitting across from them in the classroom is the employer for some place that these students had applied for numerous times. And they end up getting jobs. And 9 years later, they still have a job. So that's also important to understand when we're discussing entrepreneurship. If you're someone who is scared to present yourself out to other people, you're good at these ideas, but you're afraid to talk to other people and present it to other people, you're going to have a very difficult time. And this is not about being an introvert or an extrovert. It really is about what it means to get out your comfort zone and to go to some community events, go to some business events, go someplace where you might know one person there, but it's a bunch of people who you haven't met. And now you have to get out your comfort zone and tell them about yourself.
Happy holidays to my fans, friends, and family of entrepreneurs. When you're looking for that just perfect present to gift to those you love, here's a piece of advice. Look no further than Walmart. Walmart has a huge selection of items ranging from toys to electronics to tech. But what's even more impressive to me, Walmart has a huge selection of items created by people just like you, from makeup to fashion to food and beyond. Walmart has that perfect gift just waiting for your special someone. Give the children in your life a doll that looks just like them. Have a teen who's all about hair and makeup. Create a beauty basket of Black products that are designed for her needs. Your best friend is looking to redo, updo, do new her space. Check out all the home decor Walmart has to offer from Black designers. This year, joyfully and giftfully with a diversity of products created by Black entrepreneurs. I'm Dr. Frances Richards, wishing you happy holidays. This message is sponsored by Walmart. Dennis, talk about 365 diversity and what can we do right now to support your business?
Thank you. So 365 Diversity, you can go to the website, 365diversity.com. And 365 Diversity is based on results-based trainings and workshops. And when I say results-based, it means I'm not the person to come in and say, how do we define racism? I just don't want us to still be there, right? First of all, dictionary definitions of stuff are lackluster as a social scientist and an activist. When we challenge dictionary definitions of concepts like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, a lot of the people are still going to go back to the dictionary, unfortunately. So this is where I tell people, I don't just come in and read people a kindergarten level definition list, like a glossary. They can find that on websites. Instead, I say, okay, we're grown folk now. Let's talk about how we all have been in some form complacent, compliant, and collaborative to inequities at schools. And inequities at schools include if you say you want racial justice in school, but you're pretending not to notice that all these textbooks are written by white people. Like even if the textbook talks about indigenous and Black people, it's still written by white people. So people who are interested in doing changes beyond just hearing terms and definitions are able to contact me and learn about my work and hire me to do this work because I'm changing your school curriculum. I'm literally helping you change everything. I've done for 10 years when I created an academic program. I contributed to part of the accreditation, doing program assessments, contributed to what the libraries have. So you can benefit from 365 Diversity because I'm actually saying we have a lot of ideas, concepts, and theories, but now let's do this. Let's do this. And so that's what people can do. They can look at the website and ask themselves, does my school, business, or organization really want to change some things? Or are we saying we want to change just so that we seem like a nice person, but then at the end of the day, injustices are just sitting on our lap saying, hey, girl.
Dr. Dennis, I want you to have a monologue and I want you to name the person, living or not. And this person has inspired you so much. Who is that person and what are you saying to that person?
Well, there's two people. One person is Grandma Helen, who I never met. She passed years before I was born. However, I look like her. I act like her. I'm just a little bit more straightforward than she, but I act a lot like her and she's my mom's mom. And my mom always jokes with me. She's like, oh, you act like my mama. And in that sense, it's an example of Black women's voices and Black women's freedom. Because a lot of times when people say things like support Black women, they mean it theoretically, but they really only support famous Black women. But those of us who are doing work in the trenches, and oftentimes it's thankless, without money, and sometimes we get punished for this work, people are nowhere to be found when it comes to supporting Black women. So my grandma is a mentor in terms of we never met, but there's a reason why she and I have perhaps similar personalities because my mom always say, Grandma Helen was like, okay, y'all say no, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And if it succeeds, don't try to come to me and put your name beside it like you always helped it and supported it. So that's another form of mentorship in that Grandma Helen was like, look, if I'm doing this by myself, don't show up after the revenue comes in. Because people are good at that too. They're good at trying to ruin you. And then when something becomes successful, they're like, yeah, I know so-and-so. That's my girl. And so that also motivated me in doing this work to tell people, don't thank me behind the scenes. Because it's so often in this work that I'm the one speaking up in board meetings. I'm the one speaking up at certain events. I'm the one speaking up here and there, right? Other folk are silent. I've literally been in entire trainings where white people have tried to come in and verbally attacked me, and Black folk defended the white people because they say, I understand why white people are sensitive. And I say, okay, so here's my deal breaker. If you allow that and you're complacent and compliant, don't come to me behind the scenes to thank me for my work. If you can't speak up and out in the open, don't send me an email and say, I appreciate what you said at that meeting. And that's my Grandma Helen personality again. Of course, email did not exist back then, but that's probably something she would have said. She'd be like, well, you was acting a fool earlier. Why are you emailing me to take me to lunch now? Right? And the second person is Dr. Charles Tittle, old white man. He was my mentor in the doctoral program. When I first met him in 2002, I was nervous because when I did my master's in criminal justice, I used his research in my master's thesis. So when he became my professor in 2002 in the doctoral program, I was like, oh my goodness, now I got Dr. Tittle, now I got to impress him. I was so nervous. And then eventually he was like, just calm down, you know. Unfortunately, Dr. Tittle passed away almost 2 months ago now from leukemia. He and my dad are the same age, so he was 81. And in the fall, we're actually doing an in-person criminology conference, and we're doing presentations in his honor to talk about how he's mentored us. So he mentored me in many ways. One of the ways is that Dr. Tittle was no holds barred. Like, I said it. Like, a lot of people, when you see him at conferences or in the classroom, they were like, he just said it just like that, without smiles, without seeing if you were okay. And so he really taught me that we can spend all day, all of our lives smiling when talking about injustices. Like, racism is bad because we don't want other people to be offended. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is on the power majorities, the oppressors. It's not on us to make them happy. It's on us to speak our voice, to talk about historical and current facts. And if the power majorities and oppressors are offended by that, that just reiterates why we got to keep doing this work. So I got a lot of that from Dr. Tittle, because even when I spoke with him the week before he passed, he was like, oh, Kimya. And I told him I left academia, and he was like, okay. I'm like, he didn't say congratulations because he don't perpetrate. So he was like, okay. And he was just like, well, I'm very proud of you. I'm very happy for you. And then a week later he passed. But it just reiterates, though, that he was a good mentor in terms of knowledge development. And he never presented it as white people being the creators and owners of knowledge. He just presented it as various forms of knowledge and understanding, and the need to challenge ourselves and each other. And he always was like, look, people are going to be uncomfortable. You don't have to come in and rescue them. Let people hold themselves accountable for learning and understanding. And so that's actually what I apply to my equity work. I explain many things, but at the end of the day, we have to understand that there's but so much explanations that we can do before we say, okay, we've explained this for centuries now. What are we going to change? So those are the two people, Grandma Helen and Dr. Charles Tittle.
And sorry about your loss.
Well, thank you. Dr. Tittle's a wonderful person. And so he's been cremated and everything. And so he's just a wonderful person.
Talk about business continuity. What is your highest risk as a business owner?
So the highest risk is the monetary investment that goes into having a business. So although there are resources that you don't have to pay for, a lot of the really lasting resources require an initial payment and even a monthly payment, including memberships in business groups, including chambers of commerce. So that's a big risk, which is why my financial planners explain the importance of opening the business bank account. Because a lot of people, when they start their business, they're still messing with their personal account. And the financial advisor was like, this happens so much, especially like Black small business owners. They think they can keep messing with their personal bank account. And then, of course, that's what they give to their tax preparer, but it gets confusing no matter how many receipts you keep, right? So one thing I will say is looking at that in terms of financial planning. You're going to be spending a lot of money. Also, it goes back to the networking. like I said earlier, improving our networking, introducing yourself to people you do not know in person and via email if possible. And that ties into building your business in terms of people learning more about your business. Sometimes it can lead to collaborations. So I do a lot of community work. So what I do is I get a collective, oftentimes Black people, and especially Black women, where we'll say, we're going to connect our business and we're going to do a Black community health event. So that's something to remember, the collaborations part. It's not going to be immediate money coming in a lot of times, but you're building up your brand, you're building up people knowing about the business. And it also depends on the type of business you're doing. So there's a difference between if you're having a business where it's like legal advice, as opposed to what I do, which is inclusion and equity-based work. You have to understand that, yes, you need profit, but you also have a purpose beyond profit. It doesn't mean you're going to do free work, but it means that you're building resources so that you're developing forms of equity and justice. And you also have to be honest that if you really want to be a millionaire doing equity work, then you're probably doing this for the wrong reason. And I'm going to say that again. If you want to be a millionaire doing equity work, you're probably doing this for the wrong reason. You got to remember, where's your money coming from, right? How are you bringing the money in? And I explain this a lot of times to equity experts, including Black equity experts, because if you get to the point where somebody in the community comes up to you to say, hey, I appreciate your work. Can you come speak to my youth group? And you're immediately yelling at them about how much they had to pay you, then I think you've lost the whole community focus of this equity work. So one thing I recommend to people starting a business, you gotta think about who's your audience, who are your consumers, and that connects with what chambers of commerce. So when you talk about GIS coding data, where a lot of chambers of commerce or better business bureaus will map out the county and map out the city, map out the state. You can even map out the nation. You can find out zip codes, demographics, crime data, police reports. You can also find out businesses and where your consumers live and what's located nearby where your consumers live. So if you're doing equity work, truly doing equity work, for example, racial equity work, you can do a GIS coding map of the county and city, and you'll see that the people that you're claiming to want equity for, like Black people, Indigenous people, non-white Latin people, oftentimes live in gentrified areas where it's easier to find a liquor store than it is to find community health service. So understanding that is also important. You have to know your demographics. And if your demographics are mostly power majority, white people, men, cisgender, heterosexual, and so forth, then you just have to map that out as well, because that shapes how you market, how you advertise, how you network, how much money you're expected to make, and everything. So there are some good business advisors who will explain all aspects of that. The problem is that a lot of businesses pretend that they reach everyone. And so in the work that I do, equity work, when businesses come to me and say they are for everyone, they reach everyone, I tell them, no, you don't reach everyone. Now let's look at the demographics represented in your ownership of the business, in your employees, and who are your main customers. Because when you say you reach everyone and it so happens to only be men who are paying you, you ain't reaching everyone. And we can't pretend that's accidental. Usually it's intentional. They just don't want to admit it. So that just goes into all of it, is to really literally map it all out and understand who you're reaching. If you're claiming to reach communities, you can't be 100% focused on profit if you're truly reaching communities, because you're going to be reaching a lot of people who cannot pay you. So instead, that needs to be what you consider an in-kind donation for your taxes, instead of waving around a check all the time, because that's also problematic.
Dr. Dennis, talk to a younger you. What advice would you give to a younger you?
A younger me, travel more. No, a younger me, I would have done some things the same in terms of remaining visible in the community. But I also would have developed more professional networks, because one of the issues that I faced when I was younger is that I was trying to be like an academic based on the white version of academia. The white version of academia, for the most part, is keep your head in some books, stay in your office, don't let people see you in the streets, and that whole thing. And a lot of times that's kind of what we're taught, to regurgitate that form of knowledge. Despite Black people coming from tens of thousands of years of knowledges on the continent of Africa, we're taught the European white version, which is don't be out in the streets, just be diligent as an academic. And on the other side of that, being an activist in the community, a lot of Black folks see you as Dr. Dennis and they think you don't know what it means to be Black. And I'm like, that's interesting, because first and foremost, I'm a Black woman, born and raised in the Second Capital Confederacy with Black family. And my parents are, elderly, but they were Black activists when they were younger as well. So it's difficult on both sides. So a younger me, I would have just prepared myself for that complexity, what it feels like to not be accepted fully in academia because you don't fit their standard of scholarship, and what it means to be in the Black community where, the moment you get a PhD, a lot of times Black folks feel like somehow your Blackness is gone. I was like, that's interesting. Guess what people have called me? White people have called me over the years. They've called me Dr. Nigger. Okay, so having a PhD don't mean nothing. But thankfully, there are Black folk who understand the value of knowledge, and they understand that Africans have universities for thousands of years too. White people did not create universities. So just my younger self would have prepared myself for that, because that's emotional labor. When you're trying to figure out, who am I trying to satisfy? Who's making me happy? And eventually, as I got older, I had to just realize I'm not for everybody. I won't create it for everybody. I can't make everybody happy. I will waste my whole entire life going based on one person's frown, another person's smile, and being like, which one? You really have to focus on the supporters. Even if you don't think you have a lot of supporters, you sometimes have more than you think you do. It's just that a lot of people are scared to be supporters because they're risking a lot as well. So my younger self would have prepared myself for that complexity, because my younger self, I really thought that if people supported you, they'd be honest. But then I had to realize as I got older, so many people live a life of double faces. Like they'll support you, but they're afraid of offending their friend who opposes your work, or their family who is, homophobic. They don't want you supporting someone who helps Black LGBTQIA communities. So that's just something my younger self would have just prepared me for. The complexity of this, and I'll be 44 next month, and it's just a constant reminder that I just have to know that sometimes people's support is not straightforward, and you just have to know your purpose and stop trying to just keep everybody happy.
Dr. Dennis, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
Have you ever thought about not having a business after starting your business? The answer, yes. I think most people who start a business have thought about, what I get myself into. So yes, I have thought about, why did I start this business? Why didn't I just keep doing this community work? And the answer to that is beyond just, of course, having thought about regretting starting a business. It just reinforces the need to increase support systems. So when talking about regretting starting a business, this means you need to take some steps back and change the scope of your business. I'm an educator, I'm an activist. So the work that I do is based on teaching people, which includes communities, which includes medical and health professionals. And so when I start to feel apprehensive about the business, which usually happens when there's something going on in society, in the world, and you get disappointed about inequities and injustices, you just have to remind yourself that doing this work, those of us who do inequity work, inequities are always going to exist as long as humans exist. So we just have to understand we're doing our contribution, But if you're one of those people who think that racism is going to go away in your lifetime and even in the next lifetime, you will quit very early because you will be like, why did I start this equity business? Y'all mubs ain't changing. These policies and laws are still happening. You better calm down because this is how humans have operated for tens of thousands of years, and race has existed for 5 centuries. So you're going to feel doubt. And that's how I tell people, go out there and exercise. Go hang out with some friends. Go someplace where you don't have to think about your business and you don't have to talk to anyone associated with your business. That's where our own personal health, mental health, and physical health are very important. Because a lot of people whose businesses are very successful, including monetarily successful, are very unhealthy people. They're mentally unhealthy, physically unhealthy. They have struggling relationships with their friends and families. Why? Because they've put all of themselves into their business. So you also have to ask yourself, do you want that side? I don't.
I'm Dr. Francis wishing you happy holidays. When you're looking for that perfect present to gift to those you love, look no further than Walmart. This year, joyfully and giftfully with the diversity of products created by Black entrepreneurs. This message is sponsored by Walmart. We've come to the part of our interview. It's called Fun Facts Lightning Round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the Fun Facts Lightning Round?
Yes.
Your first job.
King's Dominion. I'm born and raised in Richmond, VA. So my brothers and I, all 4 of us, worked at King's Dominion. I worked at the unhealthy, nasty chicken sandwich store.
Your favorite color.
2, burnt orange and crimson. Shout out to Deltas. Hey, Star Wars.
The last movie you saw.
The Conjurer sequel. I saw that on Sunday. I'm a horror movie fanatic.
You relax doing what?
Nothing. I go walking at the lake and I enjoy not having to worry about anything for the time being.
Your favorite dance song.
Sister Nancy, Bom Bom, old school reggae. Anyone can look that up.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
Favorite singer, Mahalia Jackson, followed by Whitney Houston. Favorite rapper is the greatest of all time, Rakim.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Seafood. My favorite food is seafood. So I will find some crab meat, some shrimp, wherever.
Your favorite month?
July, that's my birthday.
Workout or hit the couch?
Workout. So I do cardio daily. That's how I get my mind right, especially doing this equity work.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis, for spending time with us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, why don't you share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and do business with you, and feel free to leave all your social media handles.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richards. So everyone can just go to 365diversity.com. You'll find my email address, the number to reach me, and you can find a lot of my public writing. So when you scroll to the bottom of the website, I have all of my medical and health work, my general work, some of my community involvement. Most of the work I do is publicly accessible. Why? Because I do not believe in a such thing as private knowledge. Knowledge does not belong to anybody. It is for the entire world to see. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.